Welcome to Spindle and Spoon Homestead, your place for homesteading and hand spinning. In this episode, I am showing off my pair of stays that I just sewed so I can pretend to be a hobbit. No, but really, I've been wanting stays for many years now, and I just felt too intimidated to make them. But I finally did it, and I am so happy with the results. I purchased a pattern from Hag and Company, or Hag and Co. She's a really amazing seamstress and artist and person in, I think it's Oklahoma, which is really cool because I'm from Kansas, so it's like we're neighbors. But anyway, I got her limited edition pattern. She doesn't have these in stock anymore, I don't think, but isn't it pretty? It's got all these color prints of different antiques and things, and it's just so pretty. But anyway, I didn't want to cut it up because it was so pretty, so I traced it. And to trace it, I used this Swedish tracing paper, which I highly recommend. It's specifically for tracing patterns, and it's easy to tear, but it also isn't. It's not like tissue paper that just crinkles and tears so easily. It's really sturdy. It's easy to see through and write on and cut, and it's perfect for tracing patterns. And the fabric I used was this vintage velvet brocade that I got at a yard sale many years ago, and I've made a couple small things with it, and I just love it so much, so I'm kind of hoarding it. But stays do not require a lot of fabric, and I knew this would be perfect for stays, so I used it for that, and I'm so happy I did. It's really hard to capture the colors on camera. It's a really warm tone overall, but in some of the photos it looks really high contrast and cool, like in this photo, but I was trying to capture the velvet, so I don't know. I wish you guys could see it in person. It is really, really fun fabric. So, why did I even want to make stays, you may ask? And the answer is, I just really want to be a hobbit, I guess. But and stays are kind of what I think the costumes in the Lord of the Rings movies look like. And also, what's the difference between stays and a corset? That's another question that I am thinking you might have. And I'm not a total expert in this. There's some really great videos on YouTube. Specifically, Abby Cox is a costume historian and a seamstress, and she has some really great videos about corsets and about stays versus corsets and all kinds of history stuff that she goes really in depth into, and it's really cool. But basically, from what I understand, stays are much older than corsets. They are a boned, stiff vest sort of garment that was worn under the clothing, over the shift, but under the bodice of the dress, I guess you could say. And they were usually boned, but they could also be quilted, I think. But anyway, the main difference is that stays are trying to create a cone or triangular shape out of the torso, whereas corsets, which really came into being in the 1800s, from what I understand, are trying to make an hourglass shape, so it's much more curvy, whereas stays are much more angular. And also, stays in general are less restrictive than corsets because they're not really into waist shaping. They're just more supportive and less shaping, although there is some shaping going on. They're trying to shape it into a triangle. But corsets are much more about shaping and making the waist really small and that kind of thing. So they're a little bit more restrictive. But kind of a debunking thing that I want to say is that, well, a lot of times when people see historical costumes, they're like, oh my gosh, why were people so dumb back then? Why did they wear such stiff, heavy, uncomfortable clothes? Weren't they like so hot all the time? Oh my gosh. People were so dumb back then. They were so obsessed with fashion, blah, 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 blah. And guys, that's really... I don't really think that's true. I mean, maybe there's a little bit of truth to it. But stays are not really that uncomfortable. I mean, yes, they're not a t-shirt, okay? But they don't restrict your movement really at all. Except for your rib cage. They do kind of encase your rib cage. So your rib cage can't expand as much. But they don't restrict your arms. They don't restrict your waist or your hips. You can move. You can do pretty much any move you want in a pair of stays and feel very comfortable. And also, the reason people wore stays was, number one, for support, like for the bust or whatever, and for supporting your posture. And number two, to align their body with the current fashionable silhouette. So they, no matter what their body shape was naturally, they could put on a properly fitted pair of stays and an outfit, and then they would look fashionable. And if you think about it, today, what do people do to make their body the fashionable shape? They do, restrictive dieting, obsessive exercising, or even surgery to change the actual shape of their actual body, not, just change their clothing. And to me, that is a lot dumber. I mean, I'm all for being healthy and stuff, but especially like surgery, like that's so drastic. And I'm not going to judge anybody who does choose to do that, because I do think there can be reasons to do that. And I'm not going to list them here, but I just want to say that I think it could be appropriate to choose surgery to change your body in some way, in some circumstances. And I just think, historically, I really don't think people were that dumb. And I think today we could learn a lot from them. And I do think it's problematic to be so obsessed with style and fashion, although it's also very fun. But comparing wearing a certain type of clothing that really isn't all that uncomfortable versus changing your actual body, to me that's really clear that the historical people were a little bit smarter than us today. Like if you think about it, the clothes today, they have no shape. They're stretchy knit fabrics made out of polyester and acrylic, which is just gross. I hate artificial fibers. I'm a total fiber snob. But all these clothes, you put them on and all of your little bulges and lumps show. And so you feel kind of self-conscious. Or if you're wearing baggy clothes, then they don't show, but maybe you don't look like as fashionable as you want, depending on if baggy is in fashion or not. And another thing about historical clothing is that it was pretty heavy and a little stiff in some places, but it all kind of worked together so that it was comfortable. Like the stays would be worn under the dress, and the dress would consist of a bodice and a skirt. They were usually separate pieces. And the skirt would sit on top of the stays, like around the base of the stays. And the stays, because they're so stiff, would protect your belly from your skirt waistband that's literally tied around your waist. They would just tie them on in most cases. And so, you know how when you get a pair of jeans or a skirt or something that isn't very stretchy and it's a little too tight and you wear it for an hour or two and all of a sudden your belly is just hurting and you're like, oh my gosh, these pants are too tight. I don't know. That's happened to me. I'm sure it's a common thing for people. But back in the day, that would not have happened because your belly's protected by your stays. And the heavy, heavy skirts that you're wearing and your petticoats and everything, they're tied around your waist, but your waist is protected by the stays. I just think that's brilliant. So anyway, I've been yapping about all this because it's something I'm kind of really interested in and kind of passionate about. I think I'm not going to go and wear historical clothes all the time, but I do think they had some important things they were doing that we've kind of lost. And I just think that's really cool that if we can go back and remember that and try these clothes and realize, actually, this is really comfortable. So for making these stays, I didn't have any instructions. I think Hag & Co. has instructions like maybe on Patreon or maybe I just missed them. I'm not sure. But I've read enough about them over the years, wishing that I could make some, that I felt like I knew how to do it. And it went pretty smoothly. Um, I cut the lining out of some naturally dyed brown silk scraps that I had, and I used my chalk markers to mark lines. First I sewed all the side seams together, and now in the video I am marking the channels for the boning. I've got both sides pinned together, wrong sides together, and then you just mark the boning and sew all of the channels, and that's what sews the two sides together. And the boning are made out of zip ties. By the way, this type of chalk is called tailor's chalk, and I'll link it below. My sewing machine is a Bernina. It's an older one. Honestly, I forget what the model number is, but I highly recommend Bernina sewing machines. They're fantastic. Another thing about historical clothing that's way better than modern clothing is that it's always made out of natural fibers. They didn't have petroleum, they didn't have acrylic and polyester fibers, and so they only used what they had, which was mostly wool and linen, and later on they had cotton. And the thing about natural fibers is that they're a lot more breathable than polyester and acrylic. So even though there's a lot of layers, it's not as suffocating and hot as you might think it is. And you also have the added benefit with historical clothing of it when it covers more of your body, it's more protective. So you're more protected from the sun or, things brushing up against your legs if you're walking through a field or a forest or whatever, or if you're working with animals, you've got a lot of protective covering, and that's a major bonus if you're doing that kind of work. So you can see here I'm using my pattern pieces that have pencil lines on them, and I'm just marking those lines onto the stays and then using a ruler to mark the whole line all the way across. I don't know if this is an official method for making these boning channel lines, but I was just kind of winging it and it worked out great. Another major benefit of historical clothing, especially women's clothing, is that it's really adjustable. Like with jeans, you buy a pair of jeans, and if your weight fluctuates a tiny bit, or you have your measurements fluctuate from like bloating or whatever you ate, your jeans don't fit anymore. But with historical clothing, everything's adjustable. They're not going to buy or make a new set of clothes every time their body size changes. That's just not practical. They're making everything from scratch, from the growing to the hand spinning to the weaving to the sewing. Clothing was really labor intensive and really highly valued. So it was in their best interest to make it as adaptable to the human body as possible, and they knew that bodies change up and down, you know, bigger and smaller all the time, especially women's bodies. So stays are laced, and you can lace them tighter or looser. Skirts and petticoats are literally made out of gathered rectangles on a band, two bands, one for the front, one for the back, and you just tie the band around your waist, and you just tie it as tight or as loose as you need based on your size at that moment. And it's just so brilliant. But when we developed more mass manufacturing, it wasn't as important to us to have that much easily customizable clothing, because it was not a big deal to buy more in a different size when we needed it. And now we're in the days of fast fashion and, you know, clothing, plastic clothing that will never decompose and is piled in the desert in Chile or wherever that is. And it's insane. Total insanity, guys. Okay, I bought a grommet kit on Amazon that I will link below. It was very easy to use. First, when I'm placing grommets or buttons, I just eyeball it, and then after I eyeball it, I go back with my ruler and space them out in the exact, in an exact spacing. I keep using the words grommet and eyelet kind of interchangeably, but I think technically these are called grommets. And here I was trying to figure out what the heck I'm doing, because I've never actually used one of these before. But it was really easy. Okay, I've got my ruler, and I'm going to look at my eyelets and mark with a pencil exactly where each one should go. Historically, I think eyelets were hand-stitched, like buttonholes. I don't know exactly, but I'm not sure when grommets were invented, but I don't think it was that long ago. Like maybe in the 17 or 1800s, maybe, if I had to guess. But I decided to use modern eyelets. I also took a lot of time when I was cutting my fabric out to make sure the front and center lined up so nicely, and I'm proud of that. I just took my time with it to make sure it would look good and line up and match all nicely. Okay, so basically you're supposed to be able to punch a hole with this hole puncher, but that was not working for me. So I just started using my tiny little embroidery scissors, and later on I didn't get a video of it, but my best method I figured out was I would cut a tiny hole with the scissors and then shove a pencil through the hole and work it through all the way to the thicker part of the pencil, and that was big enough for me to put my eyelet in. Because you want to cut a hole, but you don't want to cut the hole so big that the eyelet is going to start tearing free of the fabric as you wear your stays. So you put one side of the eyelet through one side, and you put the other piece of the eyelet through the other side, and then you use the tool to hammer them together. The other thing I didn't get on film is that after I put all the boning in, I trimmed the boning, I just turned under, you can see it here, I turned under the velvet fabric and stitched it by hand all the way around the stays. I was planning to use bias binding of the brown fabric, but I just didn't know if it would look good. I was worried. So my first thing was to try just turning it under, and it was pretty tedious and difficult because it's a thick velvet fabric, but I just did my best and I'm happy with it. I hope it is durable. The one thing I'm worried about with these stays is how durable they are. But, you know, live and learn. And I think I still have more fabric if I really wanted to make a replacement pair. So all these videos are at 5 times speed. So all in all, I think this took me about 4 hours to make, including tracing the pattern and cutting it out and everything. So it's really not that bad. I guess their stays are kind of small, like compared to a gown or something, you know? So they just don't take very much fabric, they don't take very much time to sew all the little bits, and I was really happy and pleasantly surprised with how quick it was. I wish I'd made a pair of stays years ago. I think striped fabrics look really cool as stays. I just love the way they intersect in the side seams and the boning lines, the way they go across. I think it's really striking. And I'm not usually a fan of stripes, but maybe it's because of the way the stripes get oriented in this type of pattern. I really liked it. Okay. I didn't show a picture of me lacing it and putting it on because that was really hard. It wasn't really that hard, but I mean, it's very different from putting on modern clothing. But I've got my linen shift under the stays that I made a few years ago, and a skirt that I thrifted a few years ago. And it was perfect. I was so happy with this outfit. And it really is comfortable. You can see I'm bending over, I'm looking for cucumbers. It is constrictive in that my lungs, like I can breathe just fine, but I have to breathe through my belly, not through my rib cage area, if that makes sense. But I can move my arms, I can bend from side to side. I am so happy with these stays. And I think the back is so cute. I am going to wear these a lot, guys, and I'm going to make more. Can you imagine some hand woven stays with some hand woven fabric? This is up close of the strap. It's just tied on in the front but sewn on in the back. The armhole is very comfortable. I have total range of motion with my arms. And the back is really supportive. I had really good posture while I was wearing this, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. Thank you so much for watching and indulging me while I go on and on about historical clothing. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to subscribe to see more of my adventures.